I was always looking for the way to make people smile. Since we get hungry every day, we have to cook every day. So even though cooking is fun, doing it every day makes it something you got to do. We want to inspire people to enjoy cooking more.
We have this evening keynote, and I guess I won't beat around the bush and introduce David Cohen from TechStars for our final keynote of the day.
Thanks. Cool. Hopefully this is on and you can hear me okay. What's up, RailsConf? This is cool. It's kind of weird being here. It's not South by for me. Just flew in from Boulder. It's kind of like this weird deja vu moment. So I'm psyched to be here and hopefully get to talk to some of you guys tonight. For those that don't know me, David Cohen, founder and CEO of TechStars. Been an investor, angel investor turned, I guess, dark side VC through TechStars and a couple of funds that I run. Through TechStars, we manage about 80 million bucks in capital and have funded about 140 companies now. So lots of pattern matching around startups and early stage stuff. And we've just come today to talk to you guys about some general observations that we've learned from TechStars that I think maybe you can apply. I tried to make it not all about startups, but stuff that I think can apply to what you guys do every day if you're not an entrepreneur currently. One thing I want to start by talking about is a thesis that I think is going on right now. I mean, everything goes in waves. What we're seeing in the sort of angel community and the VC community is that developers are the new investors. We're really seeing that. So you guys are actually deciding, more than we are, which companies are going to get funded and which companies are going to get started. And what do I mean by that? Developers are actually picking the companies that they want to work for, and therefore their talent goes into those companies that end up having something special and end up getting funded. So that's a dynamic we see going on. So pretty cool. Investors aren't making decisions, the developers are in a lot of cases. It's definitely one thing we've seen. I want to give you a little bit of background on TechStars and then get to 12 things that hopefully you can take away from what we've learned by funding startups for the last 6 or 7 years, some of the most interesting ones in the country. You may know TechStars as the accelerator that's more selective than any Ivy League school. We get about 4,000 applications a year from companies, and we fund about 50, so about 1% acceptance rate. You may know us as the one that was ranked the top accelerator in the country recently. You may think of us as a place for startups that are hanging out for 3 months, and you might think they're all young people, but actually the average age of a TechStars founder is well over 30 now. So it's all over the map. We funded from 16 to 60 plus and sort of seen a lot. Hopefully when you think of TechStars, you think of mentorship. What we think we've done is built a super powerful mentorship network, the best and brightest internet entrepreneurs and investors on the planet that actually do this. They go deep with your company and they spend real time for 3 months trying to help you get it right. We have some of the most amazing mentors, guys like Matt Mullenweg here helping Foodsy. He's actually placing the first live order on Foodsy ever. And it didn't work, of course. Failed horribly. And Matt being the best product guy on the planet said, really, if you're going to charge my credit card, you probably should ship me some food. And so they fixed that, and that was cool. Mentors like Fred Wilson here helping Matt Galligan. Matt founded Social Thing that AOL bought and Simple Geo, and is now working on something called Circa. So generating serial entrepreneurs, we're really, really excited about that. The other thing that when you think about TechStars, hopefully you think about community. And so when you start a company in TechStars, you have a whole town behind you. It's a very broad network, and we're in New York and Boston and Seattle and Boulder. We also have a program close by here in San Antonio. You get the whole community behind you when you build a TechStars company, and it's a very restful experience. It's a 3-month, pretty hardcore experience. You can sleep right there in the office. We make that available to you. Some of you have done this, I'm sure. Usually I kick everybody's ass in ping pong, and I just like to throw this in because I'm pretty good at ping pong. And then, of course, Demo Day. You might think of TechStars as Demo Day. We get typically 500 to 700 investors to show up to see these 10 new companies. And about 80 to 85% of them go on to raise meaningful venture capital post-program. So of the 130 companies we've funded, they've raised about $250 million so far, which of course is not the goal, but it's a nice milestone along the path. We've attracted some special visitors to our demo days, like Mayor Bloomberg, and you might even notice that Grimlock is even interested in TechStars. This was actually at South by, so it was really fun to be interviewed by him about the new and the old internet. TechStars was also featured on a reality TV show, 6 episodes. We didn't do anything fake, it was very real. So if you want to learn more about it, you can always watch that show. So that's kind of the background, and you may not know that TechStars, Brad Feld and I, Brad is one of the co-founders, who's a great VC that's based in Boulder. Brad's one of the early investors in Zynga, and a bunch of other companies that you all know and love. He and I wrote a book called Do More Faster, which is really some of the lessons that we learned from the TechStars experiences. And I was asked to pull out a few of them that you guys might think are interesting. So this is all stuff that we say all the time in TechStars, and it may help you think about your own work, or hopefully it will. So when Brad, and this is Brad on the right, and you might notice that we're in our PJs here in this picture, and we decided to write Do More Faster. Normally I would agree, yeah, that's kind of weird. But actually our wives were there, and it wasn't weird. We figured we would write this book, and we said when we were going to write it, it really should be about what's special about TechStars, which is the community. So the founders and the mentors around the program should write the book, and we'll just edit it, curate it, and leverage our awesome community. You guys have an awesome community too, so you know what we're talking about. So this is a book that's really contributed by all the people that are around the TechStars system. And so without further ado, 12 tips learned from doing more faster at TechStars that hopefully you can apply. Number 12, I guess I'm going backwards, like a Letterman countdown. It'll be cool. Tim Ferriss, does anybody know Tim? Tim wrote the first chapter in the book. He's been a TechStars mentor for a while, worked with a bunch of our companies. Trust me, your idea is worthless. And so a lot of you have probably been in situations where you have this great idea, and you're trying to convince the people around you that it's great, and that the idea is what matters, and we just need to work on it. Tim likes to say that it's totally worthless. Execution is what matters. And when we look at companies, we actually look at 5 things in order, very deliberately. The 5 things are team, 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 market, idea. So we're really concerned with the people, and you notice the ideas actually last. So it's about being open to the idea that it's not enough just to have a great idea. To build a great team to actually execute that idea is what matters. So for all of you that have these great ideas, the most important thing is who you're working with, and who you'll do it with, and who you'll build the team with. So there's this website actually that's really well known that you can go to actually list your idea. Right? It's like a marketplace for ideas. Have you guys used it? Do you know the site? Yeah, it doesn't exist because there is no marketplace for ideas because they're worthless. Number 11, turn work into play. How many of you, raise your hand if you just love what you do? Be honest. Love, love, love. Damn, that's a lot of people that love what they do. I won't ask the opposite question because it's embarrassing when you have to raise your hand. Howard Lindzen, StockTwits, and a great investor, talks about this is so important. Like you almost can't be successful if you don't love what you do. Right? And so you guys are all in the position where you can be where you want to be and do what you want to do because you're in high demand right now, and that's awesome. So really, if you're not doing something you love, change your situation. That's the feedback. And so we look at companies and we say, are they working on something that they're passionate about? What's their source of passion? And we want to understand it. If their source of passion is we want to make a bunch of money, it's not going to work. They're going to flame out. It's going to be too hard because startups are really hard. And work is really hard. So if you can do what you love, you'll be in a much better position to be successful. And we've seen that in our companies time and time again. Brad Feld, who I mentioned earlier, I think one of the best seed stage investors on the planet. I'm lucky to call him a friend. He works across the hall from me in Boulder. Yeah, Boulder is that small. He says, do or do not, there is no try. There's also this guy Yoda that said that, but Brad really owns this one, I think. This is, to me, about frame of mind. It's a subtle, subtle thing, but I've become a big believer in it and watching all the TechStars companies. You are going to do something. You're not going to try to do it. You're not going to use your best effort to do it. You're going to be in the frame of mind that you're going to accomplish it, and I'll tell you, you're more likely to actually accomplish it. We've seen that time and time again in our companies as well. So when they talk about, you know, we're raising an angel round of $1 million, there's language there, there's belief there, it's going to happen, this is what we're doing, versus, you know, we're in the market looking for $1 million. These things actually matter and they affect your mindset. So not just a Boulder thing, it's actually true. Number 9, Jeff Powers. He started a company called Occipital. Does anybody use Red Laser on their iPhone or Android? Yeah, 360 Pano, some of you guys. Great apps. These are the guys that built those apps. We funded them back in 2008. They're working on some really big stuff now. Their story is really interesting, and they got out of TechStars and they really wanted to raise a little bit of money to be able to support themselves and grow the company and their vision. They had a huge vision. It wasn't just apps that I just mentioned. It was about augmented reality and something much bigger. And they actually couldn't. They couldn't raise any money. Nobody wanted to take a chance on these guys. And rather than just give up, they said, that's okay, we'll just be tiny. It was just the two of them. They didn't hire anybody. They stayed lean and mean. And they just bootstrapped. And those apps that I just mentioned, there are millions of copies out there that have been sold. And they basically funded the company on this really interesting thing called revenue, which not a lot of entrepreneurs understand. And then once you do that, you're actually in a more powerful position, and they were able to raise, I think, like, you know, $6 or $8 million bucks, and they have some great investors. And now they're going after that big vision. And they just hunkered down, and their mentality was, until we have a thing, we're going to be tiny. And I think for any new software project, that makes a lot of sense, right? Everybody here has seen a software project that gets ramped up and 35 people get thrown at it, and everybody knows this is the truth, man. We're just building this thing. It's very rarely true. Better to prototype quickly, get it out there, get feedback, and stay tiny until you know you have something that's really interesting, and then you ramp it up. So Occipital sort of shows that story in action. Any SendGrid users here in the audience? SendGrid? Yeah. You can clap, it's cool, like SendGrid, come on. Sponsor, I mean, there's no reason not to clap. Don't be shy. Is there anybody from SendGrid here? Yeah, okay, they're all sitting together. See how they're working? They're really networking, the SendGrid guys. So this is Isaac here, pictured. SendGrid went through TechStars in 2009. Super, super successful. They've really grown like crazy, and they built an amazing team, including these guys. And Isaac wrote a chapter in the book called Look for the Pain. You know, Isaac actually had experienced the problem that SendGrid solves himself as a developer on like 4 or 5 other projects that he had been on, including his own companies. And he just was so tired of like this problem that existed that you couldn't send transactional email easily, and then it all got blocked by spam filters. It sounds really, really boring. Great business, it's needed. He just looked for the pain. So in any project that you're doing, like a lot of people have these ideas that are just like cool versus looking for the pain. And when you find the pain, you usually end up building something really amazing. So really look for anguish in people and difficulty with certain things, and you can solve problems that are really meaningful in the world. And that's what SendGrid has done. Number 7, Bijan. Anybody know Bijan in Boston, Spark Capital? Great guy. He's been a mentor at TechStars for a while. He talks about avoiding tunnel vision. I used to be a software engineer, by the way. I won't tell you the languages that I work with because it's kind of embarrassing. And you guys used to be my people, but now I'm like a VC, and I don't hang out as much with developers, which sucks because I really miss coding. Last time I coded was actually in Ruby. It was about 4 years ago on one of my investments, so it's actually been a while. But that was what I did for the first 10 years of my career. And I've had this problem as a developer where you get what I call tunnel vision. What Bijan talks about in the book is being so sure that what you're doing is right that you don't take the time to consider that it's probably not, right? And that you need data and you need gut together to sort of figure out if you're on the right path. And sometimes, very rarely, tunnel vision is actually right because you're just right and you have a stroke of insight. But I think more often than not, we believe that's the case when it's not. And so just being aware that you may have tunnel vision and that the thing that you're driving towards may not be the right thing early on in the life of a project can be incredibly important. 40% of TechStars companies pivot pretty substantially in the 3 months of TechStars. So most of those 40% would be unrecognizable from their application to the program. The fact that they're open to changing what they're doing makes them great entrepreneurs, I think. Emily Olson of Foodsy, number 6 is engage great mentors. I think everybody can benefit from this. Whatever you're doing, whether it's starting a company, working on a project, even in your personal life, having mentors around you that have been there and done that is critically important to success. I can't stress this enough. I mean, I didn't get this for the first 10 years of my career. I did 3 software companies. 2 of them were pretty successful. 1 of them was a huge failure. That failure was awesome. I learned the most from it. And all 3 of those, I was so dumb I didn't have any mentors around. And when I look back on it, and I think about the first company that we built, that we sold to a public company called Zoll, 3 or 4 years later, having sold the company and been working there for a while, we talked to the CEO of that company that bought us, and he said, "Did you guys know you left half the money on the table in that acquisition?" I said, "No, we didn't know that. That sucks." Shit. I just feel like crap now, and you're working there, and you're like, damn, that's a lot of money. Why didn't we get more money in that negotiation? Because we didn't surround ourselves with anybody that knew what the hell they were doing. We did an M&A transaction with a public company with no mentors. It's like the dumbest thing you can do. So, I have witnessed over and over again TechStars mentors double and triple the value of acquisition for our companies just based on their experience in the negotiation. That's just one example of surrounding yourself with mentors that know what they're doing. So as good as you are, fill those gaps in your experience with great mentors and you'll be a lot more successful. How do you find them? That's the question I always get. Everybody in this room is a mentor. I could point to any one of you and you're expert in something. If you help each other and you're willing to do that, you'll find that this sort of karma comes around. Also, just there's people that everybody looks up to that get all the demand, like some of these guys that were on stage. Everybody wants them to be the mentor, right? And they have huge demand on a few people. But look for people that maybe are in your local community that you respect, or that have built a company that's similar to what you're working on, or built a technology that's similar. It's not that hard. You'll find that a lot of people do want to help if you just ask, and not enough people ask for mentors to help. Number 5, this is the guy on the left is Howard Diamond. I don't know who the guy on the right is. So Howard has sold $14 billion with a B dollars in software. He's sold more software than anybody I've ever met. Anybody in this room sold more than $14 billion in software? Just because I'm trying to find somebody that sold more than this guy. And he has a saying, assume that you're wrong. If you go through life and your assumption is, I'm wrong and I need data to prove that I'm right, you'll find that it's pretty beneficial. It's a pretty good mindset to be in. You're always trying to prove your hypothesis, whether it's right or wrong. And so Howard talks about that all the time. Number 4, be open to randomness. This is mine. So a lot of people has anybody in this room heard of TechStars before today? Like, honestly, you've heard of it? Okay, so a lot of you, half of you. And the other half just don't want to raise their hand because I know you're liars. Here's how it started. The guy, Brad, that I talked about earlier, Brad Feld, really scary VC to me. I didn't know anything about venture capital. Man, this guy's managing like $1 million fund, or $1 billion fund, Mobius at the time. And he took a 15-minute meeting with me. He had never met me. It took me 3.5 months to get on his calendar, okay? I had seen his name on a couple documents. I had read his blog. We were angel investors in the same company, but we had never met. And he does these random days where he will literally meet anybody that asks back to back 15 minutes all day long. You say, oh, 15 minutes, that's not much time. I met Brad in that random meeting of his, and I pitched him TechStars. It was a crappy little trifold brochure that I slid across the table. And 10 minutes into the meeting, Brad said, I'm in for $25,000. I want to invest in this. I think it's great. That never happens. It was totally because he was open to randomness that he co-founded TechStars, and I think did something pretty meaningful with it. I now do these random days myself. Some of you might do office hours, right? Similar idea. You just never know what's going to come from it. And that's how I think about even today, right? Like, I don't know what's going to come out of this. I bet I'm going to meet somebody really interesting that maybe I'll do something with. And that's why I'm here, right? Honestly, like I got on a plane to come here and talk, and I just love meeting people in randomness. I'm open to it. I don't spend all my time on it, but I deliberately spend some time on it. And I think that can be a big lesson for you. Number 3, show, don't tell, another of Brad's favorites. Everybody here is naturally going to the photo, and you're trying to figure out what the bullet points are saying. Photos talk loudly. Your product, what you're building, talks a lot more loudly than anything you can ever tell someone about it. So when you're trying to show something off, you're trying to pitch somebody on an idea, show the thing. It's critically important. Nobody wants to hear you talk about it. They want to see it. So we talk about that all the time at TechStars. We don't actually allow our demo days to be, you can't use any bullet points. That's a rule. You have to show the product. You have to tell the story through the product. And people pay much more attention, and they care a lot more about what you're doing. Number 2, another one of our companies is Daily Burn. IAC bought this company. The founders are awesome. They built a really cool fitness social network. Quality over quantity. So everything you do has to be incredibly high quality. And you might say, but David, you wrote a book called Do More Faster. Like, what's the difference here? Don't ask that question. It's not a cool question. That's a publisher title of a book, okay? Quality over quantity is about the idea that everything you do is great, and if you're going to put your name on it, it's going to be great. It's not about how much you do. It's not about how many lines of code there are. It's about how great the quality of the thing is. So TechStars has been approached by 200 cities to bring TechStars to that city. 200. We're in 5 cities. We've said no 200 times, basically. Why? Because we don't think we can go to all those places and deliver as high quality of a product, right? What we want to deliver is something that is deep, amazing mentorship from the best mentors on the planet with the best network on the planet and the best entrepreneurs we can find. Put them in a room, and that's like magic. If we put that everywhere and we're like McDonald's or Walgreens, it's not going to work anymore. So we're very, very focused on quality over quantity, and I think it's a general lesson in business that is just true over and over again. Number 1, anybody hear of a guy named Matt Mullenweg? Except for in this talk, you've heard of him before. Does anybody know Matt? Matt is, I think, one of the best product guys that you'll ever meet, if you do meet him. He created WordPress. WordPress is now like powering like pretty much all the internet sites in the world in terms of the CMS. And TechStars is built on it, and tons of sites are. Great product guy. And I told you the story earlier about Foodsy. Usage is like oxygen for ideas. That's what Matt talks about. So he talks about the dark year in the book of WordPress, where they just went and they sort of built for a year, and they kind of lost their community, right? Like they weren't putting enough stuff out to engage the community. They weren't getting feedback on it. They weren't iterating enough. And he calls it the dark year of WordPress, right? And now they can do a release 5 times a day. They just are constantly putting stuff out there to get feedback. So if any of you have ideas, they don't exist really until you get feedback and you get them in the hands of users. And so that's the big lesson that Matt always shares with our companies. Get it out there, right? It is oxygen for ideas. That's a little bit of what I want to talk about. This is the book. It's Do More Faster. It's written by our community, and I've got 4 of them here. That's all I could lug with me from Boulder. And I'm going to just take any questions that you guys want to talk about entrepreneurship, startups. Please not about like language stuff, because I'm so out of touch with this stuff right now. But really anything you guys want to chat about, I'm happy to do it. And good questions. I got 4 books for the first 4 awesome questions. So thank you very much for having me.
just can't hear myself. Okay, so I've got a mic. I'm the man with the mic. So I'm gonna walk around, and I'm gonna hand the mic to somebody to ask a question. And since I saw Michael Hartle, he gets to go first.
You mentioned several of the cities you were working in, but nothing in the Bay Area. I was wondering if is that partially because Y Combinator's there, or is that part of your strategy?
Yeah. So why aren't we in the Bay Area? So the origin story of TechStars is actually one of entrepreneurial ecosystems. So we started in Boulder, and people say, "Why'd you start in Boulder?" And my answer is because that's where I live, and I wanted my community to be better. And Boulder's really come out of nowhere for a lot of people as an entrepreneurial community, and TechStars is not the only reason for that, but it's probably maybe the straw that sort of put us over. So we are about communities with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, right? And there's also an investment theory that we have, which is secondary ecosystems that aren't the Bay Area, right? So Austin being a good example of that. New York, obviously, Boston, Seattle, some of the other places that we are, top 5 or 10 communities. There's actually a lot of data that, if you can get to the best early stage investments in those locations, that the pricing is better and the returns are better. So it's a deliberate sort of choice. When we started, actually, Y Combinator was not in the Bay Area, they were in Boston. And so it's less about the competitive dynamic and more about just sort of the origin and who we are. And so we've always gone to communities that sort of brought us there, that had that chip on the shoulder. And I don't think, the Bay Area is so great, it has so much stuff going on that I don't think we'll be there.
Sure. It's often talked about the idea itself is worthless. It's the team, it's the execution. Have you guys contemplated taking teams without ideas?
Yeah. So in my experience as an investor, which is limited, so I've been investing for 7 years now, invested in almost 200 companies. I actually think it's really, really hard to take an idea and transport the passion for that idea to another team, right? So it's one thing to have a sense of the market you want to be in, but no exact idea, and maybe have a few ideas in that space. And we've funded companies like that, Next Big Sound being a great example. A really successful company that was just very passionate about music, came in and was like, our idea sucks, like we're looking for help. But in general, I think it's really, really hard to pick up passion and give it to somebody. And I think that's actually been one of the fundamental problems historically with things like Idea Lab and others that tried to take a team and spin it out that was really somebody else's energy and passion. And so I kind of fundamentally don't believe that that's a good model, personally. We love to fund high energy teams that know their market and are looking for some direction on exactly what they're doing, but yeah, teams with no idea, not really a fit for us.
So one thing that I've had a lot of people kind of come to me and they've pitched their company to me, and a lot of cases I just don't see the potential there, and I'm wondering if I'm evaluating them correctly, or if there's some way that I can identify the companies that I may want to be a part of and other companies that I may not want to be a part of, just based on the success that they may or may not have. I mean, there are other considerations like culture, but how do we as developers evaluate the companies that we should be wanting to be a part of?
Right. So I think again, it's about the people, right? So spending time with those people. There are plenty of companies. There's every sort of founder dating event I go to has 9 business people and 1 developer, and it's that developer is hot. Everybody wants to talk to them. I think you can spend time is my answer, and that's what I would recommend. Is do some stuff with them. Because you're going to jump into an opportunity, right? You should be thinking of it as you're interviewing them. Obviously, the fact that there's some, momentum with users or with investors can be a signal, but ultimately, I think you have to actually spend time with them before you really know if it's an interesting opportunity. And so just being creative about how you do that. Spend a long weekend, spend a couple of weeks on the side helping them out with some projects, and my advice would be lean heavily towards the team and the market they're in, because what they're doing is going to change. Right? Just recognize that. is so rare that a company has like this perfect idea and they go execute it. You know, they're the ones we read about sometimes, but we also read about, you know, for every one of those, we read about 10 that was doing something totally different. The PayPal story, right, was not that when it started, but they were in mobile and payments, right? So you just have to look at the market, and most importantly, man, the team. That's what you invest in if you're an investor or you're a developer.
All right. Hey, David, really big fan of TechStars. Love what you guys do. There's a lot of developers in this room, a lot of people that have ideas we want to incubate, ideas we want to make successful. And I'm curious, from your perspective, what should we produce? What should we create and prove before we then turn to a company like TechStars or other investors and show our work and show what we've accomplished? Is it a prototype? Is it a design? In your mind, what is the perfect formula before we go to investors?
Yeah, so today, like, you know, 8 lines of code and a cool name, maybe. I mean, you know, markets and cycles. Right now, it's like summer for startups, so it's, you know, like, interesting team, cool idea, here's $1 million. It's almost like that out there. For those of you that tried, you'll argue with me, no, it's not, but it sort of feels like it sometimes. I think for, you know, speaking for TechStars, you know, team, market idea, right? So build a great team is the #1 thing. And so I want to see a team that's gelled, that is doing stuff. I have this theory about entrepreneurs. I think entrepreneurs do stuff. So there's a lot of people that are like out there that are entrepreneurs that haven't actually done anything. So that's product, that's build a team, that's get it to the market, that's get some early customers. All that stuff is additive, and it shows that you can execute. So I think anything along those lines is useful. It's very hard to get into TechStars, and I'm sure a lot of the other top programs, without a, you know, pretty decent prototype today, because it's so competitive. Unless you're just a known team that, you know, has built other stuff, or, you know, something rare like that. Yeah.
Is there any chance that TechStars or a modified version of it is going to end up in an emerging market anytime soon?
In an emerging market? I think it's absolutely inevitable that something will end up in emerging markets. It already is happening. And we've been approached about it a lot. You know, the accelerator phenomenon, we're sort of the second ones doing it. You know, nothing is really new in this world, right? This is just incubator 2.0, if you want to think of it that way. Short term, you know, we actually invest instead of rent office space, but it's, you know, the mentorship is the key. And those that build the best mentorship networks are the best programs. And I think you're going to see, you know, real energy being put in, you know, from a philanthropic perspective, of corporations that are leading the charge in a lot of places. And I already know of a lot of things that are going on in different communities around the world. We've been invited to participate in some of it. And we've been super, like, open source about our program and how it works, and try to help others get off the ground. And so we're helping a few of them. There's now 1 accelerator in the internet space launching a day, at least. So it's you know, past phenomenon, and it's going to happen in every corner of the world with anything to do with technology, I think.
What's your advice to smaller communities for developing entrepreneurship?
Yeah. So that's a plant. That's off my blog. It's book-worthy, but you're like involved, so I won't give you a book. Maybe later. So I wrote a blog post on my blog, davidgcohen.com, about the 7 ingredients of entrepreneurial ecosystems. And I probably won't be able to remember all 7 standing here, but, you know, having an environment that, you know, attracts the creative class is hugely important. And if you think about any of the communities that, you know, are thriving, they have that. Like, people want to live there. That's kind of the #1 thing, right? Especially the creatives, which you all are. And I think, you know, having fresh meat coming into the community. So one of the things TechStars does to drive our entrepreneurial communities that we're in is we're constantly attracting really high-end new talent to the community. And about half of it stays, like, long term. So it's really powerful to do that. Entrepreneurial density is another thing that we talk about a lot. If you think about the most successful, thriving entrepreneurial communities in this country, you'll actually realize that they're pretty dense, and I don't mean like stupid, I mean like physically dense. And so when you think about, like, Boston, it's really Cambridge, right? And even when you think about, Boulder's obviously dense, Austin's pretty dense. Even when you think about, New York, it's really, you're talking about Brooklyn and you're talking about Union Square. That's like where all the action is, right? And why is that? Because we have to be able to form communities, and when people come into those communities, they have to be able to efficiently access them and help them, right? And we have to be able to bump into each other on the street and learn from each other. And I think the most thriving entrepreneurial communities do that. You have to throw the valley out. It's an anomaly, right? It's like YouTube, right? I mean, it's just different, right? But for every other community, I think you have to have these ingredients that really allow it to thrive as an entrepreneurial ecosystem. So both Brad and I talk about this all over the world, and I've done some consulting on this and a lot of talks, but there's a lot more on my blog, David G. Cohen, if you want to read there.
Yeah, you talk about being open to randomness and assuming you're wrong, and all these sorts of notions that, at least to me, suggest that you're looking for entrepreneurs that are willing to sort of align themselves with new ideas that come along and that they consider are better ideas. And I guess I'm wondering, how do you draw the distinction as an investor between a company that's willing to abandon an idea and go with a better one versus a company that's basically spiraling out of control and just like trying random stupid shit?
Yeah. Here, I'll give you a book. I got to start giving these out. That's book worthy. How do you draw the distinction? When you try to draw it, you have to recognize also that you may be wrong, right? I mean, some of the dumbest things that I've ever heard of have worked amazingly well. Let's be honest. Every investor that I know passed on Pinterest. Like, I don't know anybody. Okay, some of the guys obviously invested, a lot of them late. But you just look at the thing and you're like, that's not going to work. Right? And then it does. And so you have to recognize that sometimes people just have a vision and it's right. And I would actually put Twitter in that category. Right? I mean, I was one of the people that adopted Twitter, whatever year that was, that it sort of launched here at South by. And I think I even, one of my early tweets was like, this is stupid, right? So like, you don't always get it. I think I'm pretty smart, and I think I find a lot of interesting investments that are going to work. But at the same time, you have to recognize you're not always going to be right. And so, is it coming from a place of pure passion, or is it coming from, ignoring the data, right? That's one thing I look for. So it's one thing to use your head. It's one thing to trust your gut. It's another thing to ignore your brain and your head and the data, right? So if the data is telling you no, 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 and they're still ignoring it and going after that with tunnel vision, that's what I think you have to look out for, and that's kind of how I think about it.
So I wanted to ask your opinion, and I personally don't believe that we are. I like your summer, maybe even spring analogy, but how do you feel about whether or not we are or are not in a new bubble?
Yeah. Well, like the guy's got his wand out and he's like blowing a little, but I don't think there's a bubble yet. I actually don't think there will. I think we're nowhere near the proportions we were at in 1999. If you just look at the data. Yes, there are companies being funded with nothing more than a napkin and with $10 million or uncapped notes left and right, especially in the Valley. There's a lot of irrational, exuberance going on. My feeling is that, we all still remember that time in the late 90s, and we are, sort of flirting with it, but we're nowhere near it, just in terms of what's going on. The companies, you don't see the air on chairs in every company and sort of the amazing office right away. You see a few of those, but you don't see that like with regularity like you did back then. So I think we're still far from it. I think the investment community is very conscious of it, and we're expecting a correction. My personal theory is that the wavelength is just shorter. We're going through cycles that are shorter in duration. Like, 3 years ago was a really crappy time to raise money if you were a startup. Now's like the best time I can remember, right? So, it's just happening quicker, and I think it's going to continue to cycle quickly like that, and these are just normal corrections in the market. Want a book? Yeah. Here you go. I only got 2 left, because I didn't want to carry like 20 of them. There you go. Thanks.
Hi, Dave. You mentioned a failed experience that you had in the past. I was just wondering what kind of pitfalls that the young entrepreneurs should look for and try to avoid those.
what kind of pitfalls should the young entrepreneurs look for? Could you tell me the first part of the question again?
You mentioned that you had a big failure, in one of your experiences, I think.
Yeah.
So just wondering, based on that experience.
Well, like I guess the list of things to watch out for is so long. It's like, and it's different for every company. What are some of the top reasons why startups fail is kind of another way to ask that question. And I actually think that there's two big reasons that startups fail. I actually think that, again, looking at 170 companies I've been involved with, all I think high potential companies that really could have been something, and looking at the ones that fail, two patterns jump out. One is a problem in the team. It's number one, right? Like, this team is just dysfunctional in some way. That's why we spend so much time on it. They don't have the right leadership. They're not willing to bring it in. They don't have the right talent on the tech team. They're just not, as a team, gelling and clicking and just running through walls, which is what you have to do to be a successful entrepreneur. So team problems, that blows up more companies than almost anything else that I've seen. And it's literally fighting, or it's literally just a lack of willingness to hire better than you, right? Like, sometimes it's as simple as that. The other thing is what I would call lack of market. And lack of market is an inexcusable failure in my mind. It relates back to Bijan's point about tunnel vision, most typically. So it's just this belief that there's something there, despite all the data. And you could call that a team problem, right? Because a lot of things could be lumped into team problem. But lack of market, you're building something that the market doesn't care about, doesn't want. Right? And that happens a lot too. Entrepreneurs just believe, right? And they go and they go and they go, and they find out nobody cares. And they've burned all their capital, and their equity has been used, and it just ends up in a place that doesn't work long term. So those are the two big things that we see all the time.
Okay, right here, I'm going to hand this off here, but we'll only have time for, after this question, one more question. So really think about if you think it should be, your question should be the question that hasn't been answered, or asked or answered yet. Really give it some thought. And then after this, stand up. After this question, stand up, and I'll come around.
Following up on the question about the causes of failure, you mentioned that your earlier failure was the most educational. And I was wondering where, for those of us who encounter some resistance at the leadership level for putting things out there, for iterating faster, where can we find information on the value of failure? So that opportunity cost that we're missing by waiting for perfection.
Right. Yeah, so great is the enemy of good and all that stuff. I think, where can you find it? Any successful entrepreneur who's not a liar will tell you about failures they've had. Failures small, failures big. The failure that we had, like, I can tell you that the lessons that we learned from that, and they really affected my way of thinking about the internet personally. So I learned, for example, that, hey, when you're building a consumer internet product, this thing called distribution actually matters, right? And gatekeepers kind of suck, right? So that's the lesson that I can give you from my own failure. And I think any successful entrepreneur, mentors, again, back to that, can help you understand those trade-offs for what you're doing, what you're working on, especially if they have some context for what you're doing. There's a ton of writing about this, and it's the book I would write if I had the time to write it, which is Failure Stories. Because, I mean, it's so easy to go read about success. And I would challenge anybody in this room that's had a failure to blog about it. You remember this thing's called blogs? You guys still do that? Yeah. I still have a blog. I blogged about my failure. I wrote down everything I learned from it, and I've encouraged every company that we've had at TechStars that's failed to do the same. And I think you guys should do the same. And if you have a great failure story, send me an email. There's my address. And let's build a collection of failure stories, because it's way more instructive than success stories. Because success stories, they just tell you the good parts. Failure stories, like, man, here's what I learned, and here's what you should avoid. So that's the challenge to everybody in this room. Talk about your failures. It's hugely important and helpful. Good question. Yeah?
David, do you want to do one more or two more? It's sort of your
I will do anywhere from 1 to n, where n is infinity. It's up to you.
Okay, well, let's pretend you have 5 more minutes. Do you want to do 1 more or 2 more? It's sort of based on how exuberant in your answer.
I get it. You want
want
Twitter-length answers. I'll do 2.
Okay, you want to do 2. Okay, so I've been going around the room in equitable shares. Look, see, this guy popped up. Look at that. That's called initiative.
So on that note, are there any particular startups that have come through your program, success or failure, that hold just an extra special place in your heart that you want to speak to?
Besides SendGrid, since they're here. You know, they're all like my babies, right? So it's hard to pick favorites. You know, back to the failure point, EventView was in the first class and raised $500,000, then another $500,000, had a great idea, it didn't work. The way they shut that company down and gracefully returned investor money and went on to be huge contributors in other companies around TechStars is one of my favorite stories, right? They became part of the community and they made us proud, even in the fact that they didn't ultimately find success. The success stories, again, are too easy. You know, the SendGrids, the robotics, the crowd twists, are a million of them out there that have, you know, really changed the world and done amazing things. So, you know, that's the Twitter-linked answer for you.
Okay, there were 2 here. These 2. What we're gonna do rock paper. We're gonna do. You both actually popped up at the same time, although one did a chair stand, so that is pretty cool. So we're gonna do rock paper scissors between these 2 to figure out which one of them gets.
This is on the line.
So both of you stand up, both of you.
If this question sucks, you lose.
So we're actually gonna do 2. So stretch. We're gonna do 2 out of 3 because that's the only way to really do it. Okay. Okay. So here's how we're gonna do. It's gonna go 1, 2, 3, shoot. Okay, that's the way that men play this game. Okay, ready? And 1, 2, 3, shoot. 1, 2, 3, shoot. Okay, so now it is 1-0. Ready? 1, 2, 3, shoot. No, that's. All
right, thanks for coming.
What is that? There's no holes. It's now 1-1. Sorry, that's how that goes. 1, 2, 3, shoot. All right.
I'm sorry, this is going to be a bit of a bummer.
Thank you.
Chivalry. So mine is a bit of a bummer. I want to ask you what you think you can do as a team and as an investor to not have a team be skewed or distracted by investment, looking for it, and when they have it, what do you have as experience to prevent that from skewing their perspective and making them focus on what they shouldn't focus?
Okay, so you want to build something, you want to pitch investors, but that's going to take a lot of your focus and energy away from what you're doing, which is your product, and then these investors are going to have these like opinions, and it kind of sucks. So how do you not be distracted from all that? So the first thing I always talk to entrepreneurs about, like this is really weird and you're not going to believe me, but I'm a bootstrapper. So you don't have to raise money is the first thing. You don't believe me? I don't believe you. Okay, I'll make you believe me. Hold on. There's a chapter in the book about bootstrapping, in fact. So I bootstrapped my first company. The only money we ever raised was from customers. Customers are a great place to raise money from. They're not very dilutive. It's kind of like free. So I highly recommend it. Why do you think TechStars only funds $18,000, or initially only did? Now it funds $118,000. But our money is actually $18K. Why? Because you don't need much more than that to get into our program and prove there's something there. That was the theory. So the first thing is, should you be raising money? Do you need to raise money? Because too many companies default to that. That's my perspective. If you can bootstrap, you should bootstrap. Weird for someone that is an investor to say, but I firmly believe it, right? And there are a lot of companies where you just can't. You can't quit your job. You can't get out of a situation. I think you should raise the minimal amount of money to get to the next value point so that you have something that is real so that you can either raise more money or get this thing which is really cool called revenue, which a lot of people don't think about. So that's always the way that I think about it as a starting place. Should you be raising money? It's not a default. There are a lot of creative ways to raise money. So you can, for example, pre-sell your product to customers. I did that in my first company too. It wasn't just revenue, it was, hey, this thing doesn't exist, but you should believe in me and I'm gonna give you a royalty, right? So it was, we were paying them back for their investment. It was only $100,000, that's all we needed. We bootstrapped what's now a $50 million plus company a year on that $100,000. And we paid a 2.5% royalty. Once we paid it back, we kept paying that royalty forever, right? And we had to buy that out for like millions of dollars. So they did really well, but it's a different way of raising money. It's like having your customer be vested in you and your ability to sell. So there are other ways, right? Or maybe you don't even need to do it at all is the first thing to think about. And then, once you do it, recognize, dude, like it's a commitment. It's not easy. It's gonna take time and focus and energy and it's gonna be distracting. Sorry, that's the way it is.
Okay. So let's give David a big round of applause.